Can your nonprofit truly afford to make an impact? That's what we're talking about today. So typically nonprofits are born out of a need. They're created for a specific purpose, right? To serve a specific community. However, it takes money to keep these organizations running, growing, expanding, right? And so I know a lot of times we don't like to hear it, and you think of the term nonprofit as, we don't need to make any money, but in essence, you do. And so today we're going to be talking about some ways that you can assess whether your nonprofit is really making money to have the impact that it was created to have. Now, you may or may not be aware of the term starvation cycle, but this is something that a lot of nonprofits get caught up in, where essentially they underinvest in their operational infrastructure. And it's not their fault. A lot of grants, funders, right, contracts, they give money to the organizations and they have the ability to determine, right, how the organization can spend those funds. And so if the organization says, if the funder or the grantor says that the organization has to spend these funds on programs or fundraising initiatives, right, that means that you have to spend that money in those areas. But unfortunately, that means that your back end, that operational infrastructure, it goes underserved. And that is counterintuitive to running a thriving organization, because at some point, right, you have to have staff. There are certain things that you have to pay for those programs to be able to be delivered well. And it isn't always a direct expense to the program. Sometimes, or a lot of times, it's indirect and it lives in that abyss of operational infrastructure. So as you think about whether or not your organization is truly in a place to afford the impact that it actually wants to have, we're going to take it a step back, right? And we're going to take it back to basics so that we can build forward. So I'm going to take you through a series of 5 questions that you need to be asking yourself. And maybe you even want to sit around the table with your leadership team and make it an open discussion where you guys talk about these things, because a lot of times it affects more than just the executive director, right? Your leadership team needs to be in on this. And so let's jump into these 5 questions. So the first question: what is your organization's mission? What problem are you actually solving? I know that we don't like to take things from the corporate or the business world, but this is something that nonprofits can stand to do more. But it's getting really clear on the problem that you are solving. A lot of times when you end up in a space where cash flow is dry or where you're spread too thin, sometimes you've gotten away from the core reason why your organization was created. So if you were created to solve a hunger issue in a certain community, and typically, you do that through food banks, why are you having small business programs, right? And not to say that's not something you can't do, but there are organizations that do serve that need, right? And you can't do everything. And so you have to think about, what is it that your organization was created to do? What is the mission? What is the problem that you have set out to solve? And are you actually doing that right now? Because sometimes you'll take a look at your programs, you'll take a look at your strategic plan, even take a look at your budget to actual, see where you're actually spending money. And it'll tell you, does it go back to the problem that you're supposed to be solving? If not, then a change needs to be made. Number 2, how much does it cost to run your organization? And I know we're getting back into some of the numbers and having to be detailed, but this is a huge part of, one, knowing how much money you even need to be bringing in and where those funds typically need to go. And so you need to know, you need to be able to answer that question, right? How much does it take to run your organization? From the staff that you have to hire, from the programs that you have to put on, what does it truly cost? When you know that, you are then able to backtrack into how much money you need to be bringing in that year. Then you can start to think about, where are you going to pull these different funds in? You can then compare, right, to prior years to see, where have you typically gotten funding from? Are these some sources that you can go back to? But you have to have a starting point. And if you don't even know how much it costs to run your organization, you need to go back there and get clear on that number, so then you can start to build out what it would take for you to get the funding to do so, and what that number even is. The third question is, do you have the right people in place? I know when you're first getting started, a lot of times I find that you tend to be a lot more scrappy, but then you start getting some income, right? You start getting the grants rolling in. Sometimes you might get overzealous with hiring. And that's also too why you need to have your hiring plan first before you start going after people. But do you have have the right people in place. A lot of times you can be over leveraged in one department and severely understaffed in another, right? And so it's time to take inventory of who do you actually have on staff, right? Are they doing what you hired them to do? Are roles and responsibilities clear? And if you're thinking, how does this go back to impact? Well, a lot of times the way that you serve your community is through like your program initiatives, right? And typically that is staff doing that work, right? But if you have too many staff, right, or you don't have enough, that can affect your ability to deliver that programmatic initiative. And so you need to know this, right? But also when you think about that operational infrastructure, HR, accounting, right? The things that we do that aren't always seen, you also need to know, do you have the right people in place there? Many of you go months, sometimes even years without having a fiscal person, right? But you being able to have transparent financials is crucial to the organization. To me, if you did your hiring plan or you went and you saw who do we even have in place and you realize you don't even have anyone in fiscal, that's a red flag right there. And that also tells you that is someone that we need to be hiring for sooner than later, right? But before you go making any decisions, you need to know, do you have the right people in place, right? Take a look at that team roster. Who's in what departments, right? What role do they serve? And make sure that it is clear and make sure that it is still a role that you need. So question number 4 is, what makes up your funding portfolio, right? What does that funding portfolio mix look like? And some examples could be foundation grants, government grants, corporate donations, individual donations, right? You could have funding coming in from a different variety of sources, but you need to know where that funding is coming from, because you need to know, does the organization have enough flexible funding to take care of itself, right? To deliver on its programmatic initiative, to pay its people and pay them decent, right? We don't want to just be paying people scraps to come in and do hard work for us, but then we're not returning that by making sure they're compensated well, right? And so you need to know what that funding portfolio mix looks like, because it'll also highlight, are there some gaps? Is there some funding opportunities and streams that you have yet to go after that is available to your organization? You don't know unless you do the work. You have to do the assessment, because when it comes to strategic planning, when you're thinking about the programs that you have to operate, when you're thinking about these initiatives that you want to create, you want to start, you want to continue doing, you have to make sure you have the right funding to do so, right? And so you want to make sure that you take a look at your funding mix to see, are there gaps? Are there funding opportunities or streams that you have been avoiding or that you weren't aware of that you can actually take advantage of? Are there opportunities that you're missing out on? You don't know unless you do the assessment. Question number 5 is, how good are your financial survival skills? It is no secret that when you work in an organization, you have to get very creative about where you pull funds from, how you're paying certain things, making sure that you remain in compliance when you are getting creative. And so, how good are your financial survival skills? Sometimes you have to be able to pull back, right? Sometimes you might have to tap into your reserves, right? But you need to know, right, what levers to pull when different things are happening in your organization, right? And so, how good are those survival skills? What's in your bag, right? What tricks can you pull out essentially to make sure that your organization continues to run? What does bare bones look like? What absolutely has to be paid? These are some of the things that you want to be thinking about when you get to that point where it's like, wait, we are scraping by right now, but I know this is just a hump that we can get over. That's when those survival skills kick in. You want to make sure at that point you're not trying to figure it out, but you've already given thought to what those skills are and what tricks you're going to pull out of your bag. Your answers to these questions should really inform your strategy. They should let you know where your gaps exist and where your next steps should be. And I want to start a dialogue. If you have any questions or feedback about some of these questions that you need to be thinking about, please drop them in the comments below. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.